Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Evening Lecture Series co-sponsored by the Belfast Garden Club and the Belfast Free Library. Together, we are pleased to bring you tonight's program, Encouraging Wildlife in Our Gardens with wildlife biologist Gail Presley. I'm Brenda Harrington, Program Librarian at the Belfast Free Library, and I want to thank you all for joining us. Tonight's presentation is the first in our series of 3 evening programs that will focus on new approaches to garden design for resiliency and conservation. I'm joined tonight by Belfast Garden Club Program Committee member Hilary Harston. And before I turn the mic over to Hilary, who will mention the additional programs and introduce our speaker, I want to let you know that tonight's program is being recorded and will be available on the library's YouTube channel, which may be accessed from our website, belfastlibrary.org. During the presentation tonight, we ask that you keep your mic muted and type any questions into the chat, and I will read them during the Q&A at the end. With that, I will turn the mic over to Hilary. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you, Brenda. Good evening. I'd like to mention that our upcoming evening programs will be on February the 27th, Irene Barber will talk about resilient garden design. And on March the 26th, Rebecca Goldenthal will talk about container garden design to enhance our gardens. I'm pleased to introduce Gail Presley. Gail has a degree in wildlife conservation and has worked as a wildlife biologist and in landscape conservation. She was the executive director of the Georges River Land Trust for 7 years. Now retired and living in Rockland, she has passions many of us share: gardening, hiking, boating, birding, and travel. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you, Hilary. Good evening, everyone. We are going to take a short little journey through the worlds of our backyards, what we see and what we don't see. And it's a really fun topic for me because it blends several of my passions together. And 2 of the biggest ones are gardening and birding. So you'll see a lot of information related to birds, but most information that's relative to birds is also relative to other kinds of wildlife. So gardening has changed a lot since we all got started in gardening, maybe a few decades ago. And I'm going to present some of the newer ways of thinking about that. So let me share my screen and get started with that. Oops. Here we go. So the way I want you to think about this is any yard can become a haven for wildlife. And when you're looking into your yard and at your landscape, start trying to look at it through the eyes of a bird or a turtle or a fox or something like that. So why would we choose to garden for wildlife? Well, obviously for me as a bird watcher, I just love to see them in my yard. They're these amazing, colorful little gems that flit through the trees, keep me company by singing while I'm out there working in my vegetable garden. Birds themselves, they fly, you know, which one of us wouldn't love to be able to fly? But they're having a lot of different kinds of wildlife in our yards shows that we are creating a healthy ecosystem. Wildlife watching and birding is now a global pastime. There are more than 46 million Americans that are bird watchers. And every year we spend more than $160 billion on wildlife tourism, which is an incredible amount. So why not try to have this happen in our backyards as well? That makes it easy and fun. Since 1970, 1 in 4 birds in the US and Canada has disappeared. So why is that? Well, primarily it's because of habitat loss. We humans are good at making our landscapes convenient for us, building cities, lots of agriculture, and we sometimes are clear cutting our forests, things like that. Across the country, we've lost 55% of the wetlands in our country, which are huge wildlife areas. Okay, now it's not going to forward. And recently, there was a Smithsonian study that showed that declines in backyard birds are directly linked to the presence of non-native plants. So plants that weren't originally from that area. This is sort of a picture of a typical suburban yard. And in this picture, there's absolutely no food for birds or any other kind of wildlife. 90% of the insects that birds need to eat will only themselves eat one or a few native plants. So if we're not growing the plants that the insects will eat, then we're not growing food for wildlife. And of course, a yard like this probably uses a lot of chemical herbicides and pesticides, and those things can kill the insects that are food for wildlife indiscriminately. And kind of one of the main reasons that we need to come back to is that a healthy habitat for wildlife is a healthy environment for us. So let's talk about what the components of wildlife habitat are. Many of your backyard wildlife visitors have a relatively small territory. They don't go very far in their lifetimes. And so you need to think about that their neighborhood is your neighborhood, and that everything they need to get in that neighborhood has to be pretty close by. You need to have all of the various habitat components within a short distance. And the first one is that we need to provide adequate food sources for them. Wildlife go for different kinds of foods at different times of year, depending on what's available. And different species eat different things. So you might want to think about, who you're interested in seeing and target growing food for them. We need to remember to think through all of the various seasons, and I'll talk about this as we go along. In spring and summer, birds are heavily dependent on insects, but it's a very high source of protein, and it helps them lay eggs and feed their young. 96% of North American songbirds feed insects to their chicks. And in fact, one of our state bird, the chickadee, feeds somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to raise one brood of chicks, and they can nest more than once in a year. Other sources of food in the spring and summer include nectar. It helps us attract things like hummingbirds, orioles, and a variety of warblers. As we move into summer and fall, in addition to insects, which they continue to eat, and nectar, they'll start moving on to the seeds that are produced from maturing plants and fruits. Birds that migrate need a lot of these key foods because it helps them with a high carbohydrate diet. It helps them be they put on sort of a fat layer, and it helps them get ready for migration. It's fuel for their long flights that are coming up. As we move into winter, for birds specifically, they are very dependent on seeds and fruit. Again, whatever's left over. You may see birds like cedar waxwings congregating in crabapple trees, eating the leftover fruits there. They may go for maple seeds, berries that are left on your berry bushes, acorns, and the seeds from dried flowers. All these things help them stay warm through the winter, maintain their body weight, so that by the time nesting season comes around in the spring, they'll be very healthy and ready to nest. Other animals, for instance, deer, in the fall, they are going right for those acorns that come off the oak trees, as well, of course, as fruits from our own fruit trees. Perhaps you've had that experience. I see them eating apples on apple trees out in the woods a lot of times. Again, it's full of sugars and carbohydrates, helps them put on a layer of fat for the coming winter. In winter, they focus again on acorns, but also the buds and twigs of woody plants. In spring and summer, they'll start to shift their diet over to the leaves of shrubs, the twigs, and also our herbaceous plants, unfortunately, including our garden vegetables and our landscape plants. I'm sure you've had them eat on your hosta leaves, right? So another important habitat component is cover. And that means a place where any kind of small wildlife especially need to hide from other predators. It also helps with protection from weather events. And the way to help provide cover in your yard is to have a variety of different levels of shrub cover that's kind of dense. And then maybe put a brush pile back in your back corner. Any of those branches that fall down, if you've got a corner, you can pile them up. You'll find out they're full of little birds, small rodents, amphibians, and reptiles. Cover in the form of a dense hedge can be really beneficial. This one on the left is a hemlock hedge that's in my neighborhood. And I get out there sometimes right around dusk, and that hedge is absolutely full of white-throated sparrows. Just so fun to hear them twittering away to each other. Having vegetation at different heights provides habitat for different species. It also helps protect them from chilling cold winds, but in the summertime helps them protect them from hot sun. Many wildlife species also use cavities in trees, as the woodpecker on the right. And the woodpeckers are often the ones who will drill those cavities, but many species of animals will use them, especially for nesting for birds, but also you'll see flying squirrels and other kinds of small animals. I know martins will use, and fishers will use cavities, so that's pretty cool. And then in the wintertime, a lot of the little birds like chickadees and eastern bluebirds will get into those cavities at night and huddle together and share warmth, just get them through our cold winter nights. Again, using a log pile or a brush pile can attract some of these really amazing creatures that if we didn't have that cover for them, they wouldn't be coming into our yards. Our local foxes are often make their dens under dense vegetation or under big rocky outcrops. So again, thinking about a protective area that can be covered for them is really important. So moving on to another habitat component is having water in your yard. They need clean, shallow water for drinking and bathing. And for birds, it helps keep their feathers in really good condition, which if they've got good condition feathers, then it helps for good body insulation. The water also provides food in the form of aquatic insects, and it's a great spot to have amphibians like spotted salamanders or frogs. So now keep those habitat components in mind as we go through this next series of slides. First thing to do is what's already in your yard. So I recommend that people get out and take a walk around and take a notebook with you and make some notes as you go. Is it an open yard or is it heavily wooded and shady? Is it sunny? Does it have bright sunny patches and dark shady patches? Are you near a big area of natural habitat? Is there a pond or a creek nearby? Do you have a really vast lawn? How much space do you actually have? And what animals do you see while you're out there? And what do you not see that you would like to see? Have you already landscaped your whole area? If you have, there's still room for improvement. You can replace plants or redesign areas to make choices for wildlife as you go along. So walk around, take notes, inventory which plants you already have in your yard, because it's going to come in handy as we move forward here. The key is to think again, like a bird or a turtle or a fox, and think about what kinds of habitat they're going to want. Diverse habitat has lots of structural layers. So you've got very tall trees with a tall canopy on them. You've got medium-sized shrubs. You've got some vines that are twining up through everything, grasses, low plants, bird perching spots, maybe a dead tree somewhere, water nearby, and of course it's got native plants in it. One of the other things to consider about habitat is the transition zone between two kinds of habitat. So between a pond and a wooded area, those transition zones are often some of the most important areas for wildlife. So again, think like the wildlife you want to attract. Think about all the different foods they're going to need throughout the seasons, cover of different heights, small water feature, all those things could be done even in a pretty small yard. And start to sketch out what you think might be of interest to you and where you might put some things. And just doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to make sense to you, and try to incorporate as many of those different features in as you can. Having this simple plan will then let you start to think about what the possibilities are, how much something like this might cost you. And remember that you don't have to do everything all at once. This can be sort of a really progressive kind of project. One year, maybe you put in the tall trees that you need to get started because they take longer to grow. And then maybe the next year you add a water feature and so on. Again, habitat throughout the year. So having blooms that are, various plants that are blooming throughout the season, ones that are going to provide fall berries, and then seeds and nuts in the wintertime. So I have a friend in St. George who bought this house, and it was a pretty typical kind of non-native landscape when she got there. Well, she had spent her life as a native plant nursery owner, and in just a few short years, this is what she turned it into. And I tell you, she's got the most amazing bird list of anyone I know for their yard. So it's possible, and I think it's really beautiful as well. It's key to start thinking about how much lawn do we really need. Lawns today in our country cover more than 40 million acres. And lawns are biological deserts. Pretty much nothing lives there. It's a monoculture. It takes a lot of fertilizer and other kinds of chemicals. And if you were able to convert even a portion of it to a beautiful native plant meadow, think about the different diversity of plants and insects and wildlife that you would have. Provides food and cover, and it can be incredibly beautiful. One alternative to a lawn, if you still want to have some open green areas, is to put in a clover lawn. The benefits of clover is that it's a really soft and lush vegetation, soft on the feet. It's very inexpensive to grow. It doesn't grow like a lawn, and so it requires a lot less mowing. Doesn't need any fertilizers or herbicides or pesticides. It's drought resistant, can grow in poor soil, so you don't have to improve it. And in fact, clover is a nitrogen fixer, so it actually improves the soil as you're going along. And it blooms so that you get all kinds of pollinators using those beautiful flowers. Excuse me. A couple of examples here for Maine are the Dutch white clover and red clover. There's different varieties, different ways to get this started. If you, of course, don't have a lawn area and you'd like to put in a small clover patch, that certainly is easy just to seed it in. But if you already have some green area and like to convert it, just start overseeding some of those bare patches that show up throughout the year, and it will gradually expand within your existing lawn. Another important component before you get into thinking about what you want to plant is thinking about what you need to get rid of. Unfortunately, Maine is pretty well infested with invasive plants, and they are very prolific spreaders. They outcompete our native plants by taking over the sunlight and the space and the nutrients in the soil. They put out lots and lots of seed, which gets spread over all over the place. So it's really important to go around your property when you're doing that initial scouting of what you have and inventory what invasive plants you have. Start to remove them. And if for some reason they're already fruiting with seed pods or fruits, be sure to put those in a bag and take them to be incinerated. You don't want to put them in your compost pile or dump them out back because they'll just spread some more. Invasive plants are an ongoing control need. You got to do it every year. Got to get out there and look. But the earlier you get to it before they're seeding, then you'll really start to see a dramatic decrease in how much you've got on your property. Well, another fun idea is if you have space, you might want to create a pond or a marshy area. We have a ton of water that rolls off of our roof each year, and you could divert it into a low area on some corner of your property. You would want to design a pond like this to be relatively shallow with varying depths, that has maybe some gravelly areas so that the birds could and other wildlife could wade in. Maybe a little muddy area where the birds like barn swallows can pick up mud for their nests, and open water for maybe an otter or a mink or turtles or salamanders. And another fun thing about having a wet area or a pond is that you get to choose plants that are specifically suited to growing with their feet wet. You might want to instead have a free-flowing little stream that's maybe got a waterfall feature in it. It doesn't have to be fancy, but animals are drawn to moving water. And rocks and logs that you might have alongside could be good hiding places for them. It creates kind of this moist microhabitat that allows you to grow very specific stream-side plants that probably wouldn't grow in other parts of your yard. And because the water is moving, it reduces the production of mosquitoes. If you find that you have a dead tree on your property that's got some kind of excavation going on, this on the left is excavations by pileated woodpeckers. They're hunting for ants, which live in the interior part of the tree. That's great. Try to keep it as long as it's in an area where it's safe in case it were to blow down at some point. It's terrific habitat for any kind of cavity nesting bird. And also you'll start to hear woodpeckers because they like the sound that comes from these dead trees, and they'll do their drumming on the tree, which is actually their way of announcing that it's their territory. If you don't have those kind of trees, you can create a similar habitat by collecting dead tree stalks, I guess I'd call them, or nice straight limbs. This one on the right is a friend of mine, put these up not too far from where her bird feeders are. And she just saw a huge increase in the kinds of birds that like to use dead trees for foraging. Also, if you have trees that have already fallen, it's a really good idea to leave those as best you can to make sort of a micro environment. All of a sudden, that's a place where you're going to have fungus growing. It will collect fallen leaves, and it's great cover for amphibians and reptiles. Might see little box turtles. It's also home for insects, which of course, as I've said numerous times, they're big wildlife food. It's also a great little wildlife highway. I noticed that the chipmunks in my yard scamper right along those logs and as they're headed toward their dens in the rock walls. And in the wintertime, it's a great way to go out and see who's kind of running around your yard, because once you get a snow cover on a fallen log, the tracks for those wildlife species become much easier to identify, and you'll see who your neighbors are. Another feature is to think about adding soft landings under existing trees that you already have in your yard. These native plants are low growing and they're adapted to shady conditions. And wildlife will spend a lot of time using all the different levels of habitat in our gardens, and they may be foraging around up in the tree limbs, and then all of a sudden they'll drop down to the ground. And it's a really good spot for them to pick up seeds. It will help capture seeds in the plants that are growing there. It's also great shelter for beneficial insects. These plants can also help build the soil health, and all of those things helps improve biodiversity in your yard. There's some fun things you could add if you were so inclined. Some species really love to get out for a good dirt bath. It helps put that really fine particle soil on their skin and around their feathers and fur, which helps control parasites that live on the outside of their bodies, helps absorb excess oil, and then when they shake it off, it helps essentially clean their fur and feathers. So to make a dust bath, you just need to clear an area that's a couple feet in diameter, and then really pulverize the soil to make sure it's really light and fluffy. And then sit back in a place where you can watch and see who comes around to use your dust bath. So as I said a minute ago, I think messy is beautiful. But I realize this can be a challenge for many of us that grew up with gardening practices that were very tidy, and each little plant had its own little space with a nice mulch around it. That's not what you want for wildlife. You want it all crowded in there together, growing in this wild riot of color, which is food and cover for your wildlife that you're trying to attract. So we have to change our ideas about what looks like a good garden, and change your idea of what a weed is, because there's a lot of our native plants that some people would consider weeds, but they're really powerful wildlife plants. Okay, so now we get to the fun part about thinking about what plants to put into our yard. And this is an example of a garden that I created for my Master Gardener program at the Langley Art Preserve in Cushing, which is open to the public. You can go and see it. And they had built a new parking lot and had this great big island in it. So we decided we wanted to put in a pollinator garden. And I did a lot of research on the plants, specifically to talk about, or to think about making sure I would have something blooming from, the end of April all the way into October, things that were of different heights. They all needed to be native plants. And I came across this really great online tool that was free that let me create this plan that you see. And each one of those different icons represents a specific native plant that I chose. And it helped me figure out how many I would need to purchase for this garden by adjusting the size of the icon. So it was a really great tool, and it was a lot of fun to spend the winter thinking about it before we got into the planting season. It helped us estimate costs and numbers, and I would recommend that if you have a big area that you want to do, you need to plant. Excuse me. I spent the winter going to the local library, and I checked out every book that they had on growing plants for wildlife. There's quite a few. This is just right out of my Rockland public library, which I thought was great. And of course, our libraries are connected throughout the state, so you can order books that are in other libraries and have them transferred for free to your library and go pick them up. So it's an amazing resource for us. This kind of a project requires, a lot of homework, and but it was a really fun thing to do while it was cold and snowy outside. Okay, so choosing plants. Well, the good news is that wildlife and gardeners are attracted to many of the same plants. So as we go forward, remember that you've got your plan, you know what you want to plant. Be sure and take your plant list with you when you go to buy plants, and don't get distracted by the latest cool, bright and shiny plant that's out there. Stick to your list, because those are the ones that are going to be the most important for wildlife. As you've heard me say several times, native plants is where it's at. They are the ones that are going to meet the needs of wildlife. They provide the leaves and the seeds and the berries. They provide the protection and the nest sites. They help us restore the way things work together in nature. So as I said, that thing about 90% of our native insects are only adapted to our native plants, that's the kind of connection we want to make in our yard. Same thing for other features that they help provide is they'll provide deeper root systems, which helps rainwater penetrate deep into our soil. They'll provide nutrients that help improve our soil. They'll also disperse seeds beyond where you've planted them, which will help make a larger native plant area in your immediate area. They're adapted to local conditions, which means that they're hardy to our winters and they're going to survive. Makes it easier for you to grow. You don't have to water them once they're established. Maybe, you know, partway through the first year or depending on how the weather is. You never need to fertilize them. You don't need to use any chemicals on them. You don't need to mow that area. And it's also going to be something that is helping us address our climate concerns by storing carbon in the plants that you are planting that are native plants. Natives are a big deal right now, and you've probably heard of Dr. Doug Tallamy from the University of Delaware. He's an entomologist and an author. He's written a couple of wonderful books about bringing nature back into our yards. And the term that they're using is they're calling it rewilding. He's a sponsor of the program called the Homegrown National Park, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And he has recommended a goal of having 70% of the plants in our yard be native plants. So that's a really concrete thing that we can measure as we go forward. And know that it takes at least 70% for those chickadees to be able to raise young, because they have to have those caterpillars and other insects that they're going to use, which means that with a garden that's got at least 70% native plants, you're maintaining the population of chickadees and all the other bird species as you go forward. Okay. So natives are not all created equal, but in this case, the message here is you want to avoid cultivars of our natives. Our plant propagation industry in this country is really great at trying to improve upon native plants, but that's not all good news for wildlife. For example, the ninebark on the left is the straight species, the native plant that grows in our area. But the ninebark on the right has been crossbred to have it show these ruby red leaves and pinkish flowers. So there have been several recent studies that show that there's a significant decrease in insect use on altered leaf color plants. So if you plant one of those ruby red ninebarks, it's not going to do the same thing for wildlife as the straight species. Same problem with plants that have been modified to have fancy double flowers. The insects can't get inside to the pollen. So they're not able to pollinate it, and therefore they're not creating seeds, which is not creating more native plants. They've also found that the seeds and fruits of straight native plants have a better nutritional value than the seeds that might be produced on the cultivars. I think native plants look great in a naturalized setting, but they can also be, you know, pruned judiciously and fit really well in a more formal garden. So I'm going to show you a few slides of examples of plants, but know that there are many, many, many more choices. If you have room to add trees to your yard, these are the key four for wildlife. These 4 species each host more than 400 species of caterpillars, which is feeding our birds, as I've said several times. Willow, oak, birch, and chokecherry, or also known as Canadian plum. Plus, in addition, they're offering good nesting sites, great cover, and acorns and berries. So these are real winners in your wildlife yard. If you're looking to add some evergreen cover so that they have a place to escape from predators and be protected, Eastern hemlock and Eastern red cedar are two great choices. They also provide edible seeds and berries. And sort of a rule of thumb is to have at least one dense patch somewhere in your yard, but if you've got the room, another dense patch would be even better. Some of the shrub winners that we have, serviceberry, which is Amelanchier. I have one of these in my yard, and I tell you, the birds clean the berries off before they can even get fully ripe. That's how much they love that tree. Dogwoods, which are cornus, and winterberry or ilex are all terrific choices for shrubs. With ilex, be sure that you get both male and female plants. Otherwise, you won't get berries on your bushes. And I love to watch the turkeys come through in the late fall and snip off all the remaining winterberry berries. Perennials, this is where there's really lots and lots of choices. They're great for pollinators, butterflies and bees and birds. And these native plants are just absolutely beautiful. So again, think about having something that blooms throughout the season. Some of the best ones are asters. And remember, again, the straight species, not the hybrids that you can get. In the wintertime, the redpolls love to come and eat aster seeds right off. They'll perch on the end of the long branches and eat the seeds off. Goldenrod is just beautiful. There are many, many varieties. It's fun to watch the birds get after the seed heads. And contrary to popular belief, this is not the plant that gives people hay fever. That's something else. Joe Pyeweed is another great one. These big, beautiful, pink, fluffy seed heads are loved by butterflies while they're blooming, and then the seeds by fall migrating birds. If you have room, it's a great idea to add some vines. Wild grape is a terrific plant. It grows dense enough that it creates wonderful nesting cover for birds, but it also produces these great berries that are eaten by all kinds of different wildlife. Virginia creeper, I think, is a wonderful plant, and I think the beautiful red color that it turns in the fall is just an extra bonus for us. But it has great berries and, again, nesting structure for wildlife. If you're thinking about that pond or wetland area, some great choices here are buttonbush, which will be covered with butterflies when the blooms are out, like this one. Black chokecherry makes these terrific berries that are really highly sought after by small mammals. And then blue flag iris is another great one for pollinators and butterflies, but also hummingbirds really like that one. Okay, so there's lots of places you can go online to get information about what kinds of plants you might want to put in your yard. And I believe when you signed up for the program, there was a handout that I provided. And if you haven't got it, our friends at the Belfast Garden Club can make sure you get it. And it's got a whole list of all kinds of online resources. So there's places like the Audubon Native Plant Database. It's really cool. You put in your region and tell them a little something about what you're interested in. And it'll even tell you what birds are attracted by the different plants that you put in. Maine Audubon has a great online native plant directory. The Cornell Bird Academy has a great one, as well as the Wild Seed Project, which is based in Portland, has a terrific list of wild plants in Maine. And where do you go to buy native plants? Well, I'm partial to going to my local soil and water conservation district, the Knox-Lincoln one, annual plant sales in early May. They have a fantastic lineup of native plants, as well as food producing plants. Maine Audubon has a huge native plant sale every year, a little bit later in June, I believe. The Wild Seed Project, again, has a sale And they also maintain a list of sources where you can go around the state to different nurseries and purchase native plants. Cooperative Extension also has a list of sources all around the state of nurseries that offer plants. And then you can also pick up native plants at your local plant sales. Just be careful when you go to local plant sales and check the plants out carefully to make sure you're not picking up any hitchhikers that you don't want to have come home with you. I've got native plant sales around me that happen at the library, at the churches, nature centers, botanic gardens, and if there's a garden tour near you, they might also have a plant sale. All right, well, let's talk about what happens in the non-gardening season. Well, maybe is there such a thing as a non-gardening season? I don't know. Maybe a short window in the winter. It's a great time to sit back and reflect. What did you learn this year? What did you plant that worked great and did exactly what you wanted to do? What do you need to move? What died? What didn't work? It gives you a chance to plan for next year. But in the fall and winter, wildlife still have needs. So we have to be sure that we've planned for them. And the first thing I'm going to tell you is what not to do. So don't rake your leaves. This has also been out there in the world lately. You see it all the time in the fall. The fallen leaves are an ideal place for wildlife to forage. The insects get down in there and hide. It covers up seeds and berries. It provides a layer that allows the insects to overwinter so that they'll be there the next year when the wildlife need to eat them again. And they're another great thing for our small mammals. Have you ever seen the chipmunks going around collecting eggs and then they go and burrow right into your rock walls? They use those dead leaves for insulation in their winter nests. If you have to rake leaves, my suggestion is to just put them off the side of the area that you need to keep clean, but right into your native plant bed that's nearby. So don't haul them off your property, just put them out there where they can decompose and add back into the soil. And great, my program just started over. I'm gonna have to wing it now. So anyway, that's a great thing to do. The other thing is to leave the stalks of your plants tall all through the winter. And those stalks, they're hollow, most of them, and they're a great spot for insects to crawl up in there and survive over the winter so that when it comes to the next spring, they're ready to crawl out and become food for the wildlife that we have in our yard. This material also provides additional nesting materials for birds, but also like the chipmunk that I just talked about. They'll actually strip those fibers right out of the milkweed. They'll collect pine needles and small twigs and leaves and make their nests in the next year. And don't forget that they still need to drink. And your little stream or pond that you may have created is probably frozen over or dried up. So having a winter water source is a really great option. I have a small little heater in this bird bath, what could be considered a bird bath, but it's a winter water source. And it stays just warm enough to leave for open water. And you can see where the birds have been sitting on the edge and getting a drink there. All right, so maybe just a couple other ideas to go one step beyond. I really highly encourage you to stop using any kind of chemical pesticides and herbicides in your yard. Pesticides kill insects that are food for wildlife. Even the botanical versions of them are targeted to kill something, and you don't really know if they're killing things beyond that. So with good habitat, if you're growing really good habitat in your yard, the birds are going to help you control those pests that you may not want on your vegetable garden. So my best example is I went out one day, I have a little patch of high bush blueberries out my back porch, And I saw these writhing group of little caterpillars crawling all over it and eating the leaves on my blueberries. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to go out there and pick them all off by hand. But before I could do that, I think it was the cardinals swooped in and started eating those little caterpillars right off the bush. So they took care of it for me, and they can do that for you too. I think that gardening is never a once and done. It's an ongoing thing, and I absolutely delight in tweaking my garden. To me, it's a lifelong pursuit to get the perfect garden when I'll know I'll never get there. But that's okay. I love to watch what the animals do in my yard and then try to adjust so that I'm meeting their needs. I keep a journal and I write down what works and what doesn't work. And then I look for options for the next year and think about the things that maybe died or need to be moved and where I can plug in a new native plant that I haven't tried before. Okay, so you may have gotten the feeling that I'm kind of a bird nerd. Well, I'm also a garden nerd. And again, I found an online garden tracking program that works right in Excel, and downloaded it. And I put in every native plant that I plant and where I got it and all the little details about it. And then down at the very bottom on the right-hand side, you can see it says 62%. I'm using it to track my percentage as I'm trying to get to 70% native plants. So I'm at 62% and I'm almost there, but I got a little bit of ways to go. This particular one, I also set up a page that I track rainfall, and maybe it doesn't, actually adjust how I garden, but I find it fascinating to look. For instance, this year I had at least 10 more inches of rain in my yard than I did the year before. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Another key thing is if you have a large meadow area and you probably got ground nesting grassland bird species. And if we are mowing those areas before August 1st, you're most likely, excuse me, most likely either crushing eggs or young birds that haven't had a chance to fledge yet. So if there's any way to delay meadow mowing till August 1st, by then all those young birds will have gotten old enough that they can fly and escape, and they'll be safe. And then you'll have more bobolinks to look at the next year. And for your own enjoyment of all this hard work that you're going to put in, I recommend that you get a really good quality pair of binoculars. They are a game changer. They're better at bringing in light so you can see things better. I recommend a magnification of at least 10 by 42 and keep them by your back window so they're handy for when somebody wanders into your yard. I also suggest that you try a game camera. It will show you who's there when you are not out there, especially at night. There's all kinds of things that are wandering through our yards that we're not even aware of. For instance, this was in my backyard. So this is a pair of gray foxes that came through my yard one year, and they brought their kit with them. And it was so much fun going out every morning and getting the chip out of our game camera and looking to see what they've been doing around our yard. They were just a delight. Another step to go one step further is to commit to this idea of rewilding. You can actually go on to the Homegrown National Park website, which is a new nonprofit, and you can register your property that you are committing to plant native plants and that you're working toward the 70% amount of native plants. You can go to the National Wildlife Federation, and they have a form, an application form online. And if you meet all their criteria, you can get your habitat area certified, and they'll send you a sign that you can put up and show off to all your neighbors of why you are planting all these wonderful, beautiful plants. So I guess your vision and your planning and your hard work, it will be rewarded. So now, after we've done all that hard work, it's time to sit back and enjoy. And I hope you've gotten a few ideas that you can put to work in your own garden.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you so much. I bet you can guess what the big question was at the very beginning. What online tool did you use to plan the Langley, however you said that, Langley's garden?
Uh-huh.
I got
The one with the little plant icons. It
Yes.
should be in the list of the resources that I gave you. It's a one-pager full of all kinds of online resources, and I believe I put the link in there.
Okay, I did not get that. Does somebody from the garden club have that so we can send that to our people? I don't know. Anyway.
That list is linked from the Garden Club programs webpage under this program, Brenda.
Okay, that's good. So if you go to the garden club's webpage, the link to the list is there. Does anybody know what it is off the top of their head?
I don't remember the name of it.
Okay. All right. Well, then the same thing is probably true of the landscape, the plant inventory tool
Yeah.
too. The
Yeah.
one that you put in Excel spreadsheet. Okay.
Yeah.
So Hillary asked the question, how do you identify what you called a straight species?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Most of the time, if you're doing your homework ahead of time, you'll know what the plant ought to look like. So you'll know that if you're reading about native plants and you're reading about ninebark, it will say green leaves, white flowers. And then if you're going to the garden center and you see purple leaves and pink flowers, you know you're not getting the straight species. But beyond that, on the tags that are on most plants, especially in garden centers, it will often have a little name in quotes after the scientific name or the common name of the plant. And that name in quotes means that somebody has specifically cultivated this particular variety. So you want to look for the ones that don't have those extra little names on them.
Okay, let me see. I got another question I have to read here. This is a long one. Next yard soldiers. Somebody, I think this is a comment that someone's next door neighbor nukes their yard several times a year. I have never seen a bird or any insect in their yard. I'm trying to build a wildlife friendly yard, but I am luring unsuspecting critters to their. I guess the question is, because her neighbors are nuking everything and she isn't, is she bringing wildlife into her yard that may succumb to her pesticides?
That's a really good question.
I don't know why I said her there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I suppose that's a possibility, but if you're growing really great habitat on your side of the fence, why would they ever go over on the other property, right? If they're getting everything they need from you, all the food, the cover, the water, everything, and you aren't using those chemicals, then theoretically they have no reason to go onto the other property. It's also a great opportunity for you to, you know, very gently start introducing your neighbor to the beauty of what you're growing in your yard and the really cool wildlife that you saw. And if you're really excited about what you're doing, then, you know, they might start to say, well, how do you do that? And then you've got an opportunity to talk to them.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that. Somebody asked, the downed logs that you suggested, should they be in the shade or in the sun?
Either one, doesn't matter. They'll use both.
So we did have a presentation from Doug Tallamy last year. And this person's, it was really great. He zoomed in. Doug Tallamy told us that cultivars are natives that don't have altered leaf color or double blossoms. I can't read or color or double blossoms are probably okay. What's your take on that? For some reason, I can't see that question.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of variation depending on how much the plant was altered
Yeah.
during its various iterations of being turned into a cultivar. So it's probably a bit of a spectrum. So maybe the ones that are closest to the straight species would be fine. But the further you get from that, then the more potential problems you're going to have. I was just quoting a little study that I saw that said that the double blossoms often prevent the insects from being able to get into where the pollen is. So it's just something to keep in mind. And, there are trade-offs, when you're making those decisions.
Yeah. So two people, they put the link for the online tool in the chat if anybody wants to see it.
Okay.
A small blue printer, and it's like we just said before, it's on the Belfast Garden Club webpage, which I was not aware of. So anyway, it's good to know. I'm going to go look at it. Does anybody else have another question? I'm not looking at everybody. I should probably do that.
Somebody just asked, what kind of heater do you use for the water feature?
Oh, yeah. I think I probably ordered it online, and it's just a small little, maybe 8 or 10 inch metal thing with about a foot long cord on it. I don't think the brand matters at all. It was specifically designed for keeping a water, I don't think it was specifically for birds, but for keeping a water source uniced, warm enough that it wouldn't ice over. So just search online and you should be able, in fact, you may be able to get one at Tractor Supply for all I know. But I know that I ordered my online.
Somebody asked, is there a danger of attracting coyotes?
Ooh, coyotes are awesome. I love coyotes. They are part of our ecosystem, and I just love to hear them howling at night out in the woods behind my house. It's so exciting. At a place that I lived before, they had built a den not very far from my property, and as their puppies got older, they would wander out into my area, and I had some irrigation tubing out. And I would go out there and they would have chewed that tubing up into like 4-foot lengths and carried it around, and they were like playing with it and stuff. So sorry, I love coyotes, and I think they would be an incredible thing to have in your area.
All right. Here's another comment about growing native plants. It's best to grow them from seed, or buy one from a nursery that does grow from seed, like a lot of the native plant nurseries do.
Yeah.
It's just a comment. And then another question, any additional tips for improving school campus landscapes?
Yeah, that's interesting. One of my other roles is I'm involved with Mid-Coast Audubon, and we have had a program where we gave feeder stations out to schools and libraries. And it was really hard because the planning of the landscape around a school is that they don't want a lot of shrubs and bushes where I guess maybe somebody might hide or something like that. So it was kind of just this barren lawn landscape. So we encouraged them to work with the gardening people responsible for maintaining the grounds of the school, and try to see if they could make a small perennial garden with maybe one kind of dense shrub on it, so that the birds would have some immediate escape cover right next to the feeder station. So again, it's a matter of looking at what landscape you're in and trying to make choices about where you can increase the diversity of plants and features like water feature to make it more attractive to wildlife. And I think actually having the kids involved in that, and then maybe having them have binoculars in the library or something that they could check out and go watch things, I think that would be terrific.
Cool, thanks. Well, I just want to say that our library in Belfast is very fortunate to have the Belfast Garden Club maintain our garden, and it's a pollinator-free garden, and it's beautiful. So
Yeah.
you see all kinds of birds in there. Another question, would you call a bird bath enough for a water feature?
Given if you have a small area and you don't have the right setup for having something more, it certainly provides a necessary water source. I have a bird bath in right near my bird feeder, and I have watched all of the birds bathe and drink. I have had raccoons in it. The squirrels get up in it and drink. And I have watched my neighbor's cat get a drink there too. So it can serve the purpose of providing water if there's no water anywhere else. Certainly a more naturalized water feature is a better choice if you can do that, if you have the space and can make that happen.
Any more questions for Gail? I guess we can wait a second and see if one comes in the chat. You can also unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one. Maybe not. Oh, thank you. Someone says, thank you, Gail. Great presentation. And I will reiterate that. Thank you so much. Oh, one more comment. Maine also has a pollinator garden certification program. Yes.
Oh, yes. My Langley pollinator garden got certified through the Maine Master Gardener program, or the Cooperative Extension certification program, which I was very pleased about.
Yep, that's wonderful.
And
Well,
there's another question. What do you do about feral cats? Somebody's had 2 birds killed by feral cats.
I missed that.
Yeah, that's really a hard one. I don't know that. I mean, if you knew for sure that they weren't someone's pet, you could trap them and take them to one of our Humane Society type shelters. But if you're anywhere where they could be your neighbor's cat, you don't want to get involved with that. And the only thing to do there is to, try to be a model that, we talk about how cats are safer indoors, that it's, are not as likely to catch a disease as they would outside. They're not going to be eaten by a coyote. They're not going to get hit by a car. It's so much safer for cats to be living indoors, and it's better for all the wildlife in our yards as well.
Thank you, Hillary, for seeing those questions. I missed a few. Yeah, that can be a problem. Well, I'm gonna stop recording, and thank you so much, Gail. I think it's a very wonderful program and people learned a lot, so thank you.
Terrific. Thank you all for coming.